I have been working as a freelance land surveyor for about 15 years now. Most of my work is solo, remote stuff, meaning I am out in the middle of nowhere by myself. I am usually camping out for days at a time in places that nobody else is going to. Honestly, I actually prefer it that way. Or at least, I used to. This happened about 4 years ago. I had been hired to survey boundary markers on a parcel up in the mountains near the Clearwater region in Idaho. The Bitterroot Mountains of Idaho are known for being brutally unforgiving during this time of year, with sudden blizzards that can trap even the most experienced outdoorsmen in a matter of minutes. The client was a private landowner who wanted to subdivide a massive plot of heavily forested mountain land, and they needed the official corners verified. Remote does not even begin to describe it. It was 6 miles of hiking just to reach the spot where I set up my camp, let alone the actual boundary lines. I filed my route with the local ranger station like I always do, and I packed a week worth of supplies into my heavy expedition pack. The first day went incredibly smooth. I found 3 markers, logged everything in my notebook, and made it back to camp before dark. The forecast had called for cold weather and light snow, and that is pretty much what I got. By the second day, though, things started to change. We got way more snow than we expected, and the temperature dropped significantly. The next marker was only about a mile out of the way from my current position, deep in a steep ravine. So, instead of calling it right then and there and staying in my tent, I figured, what the hell, I can knock this out quickly. That was a major mistake. I honestly still think about how stupid it was not to just hunker down or make my way out of the woods when I had the chance. But I was stubborn, and I thought I could handle it because of my experience. The terrain was all hidden rocks and icy slopes under a fresh layer of deep, powdery snow. So to translate, it was the worst possible conditions to hike through. I was picking my way down a short embankment, holding my heavy transit GPS pole, when my right boot hit a patch of slick ice that I never saw. One wrong step like that in the backcountry and you could die. And I mean that literally. I slid probably 15 feet down the slope before catching myself on a thick tree root. I was incredibly lucky not to have slid further down into the deep ravine, but the pain in my right ankle was instant and overwhelming. I tried to tell myself I was fine, but the moment I stood up and put weight on it, I audibly groaned in pain. I could not put much weight on that leg, and I knew it would be a few hours before I would be able to walk normally, if at all. I was so mad at myself for being careless, but there was absolutely nothing I could do. I abandoned the rest of the work right there. There are no landmarkers worth getting stranded and freezing to death over. I painfully made my way back uphill to the main trail, using my survey pole like a crutch, and started the slow, agonizing hike back toward my camp. Every single step sent a sharp jolt of white-hot pain up my leg, making me break out in a cold sweat despite the freezing air. But after a few minutes of hobbling along, I noticed something strange. There were boot tracks on the trail. They seemed to have come from further into the woods on my left side, joining the main path. They were heading in the exactly same direction I was going, and they looked somewhat fresh. I could tell by how sharp the edges of the prints were, despite the fact that it was actively snowing. I figured it was probably a hunter, or maybe someone from the landowner crew checking on the property. It is not unusual to cross paths with people out there, even in remote areas like this one. I did not think much of it at first. I just kept moving, trying to keep as much weight off my injured ankle as possible. As the light started fading and the woods grew darker, I began hearing faint sounds behind me. At first I chalked it up to normal forest noises, like falling snow or birds, but the more I listened, the more it sounded like deliberate footsteps. I kept turning around and looking over my shoulder, but I could not see anything through the trees. That part of the forest was pretty dense though, so if there were any animals stalking me or something, there is a good chance that I would not have been able to see it anyway. I decided to stop walking to see if the sound would continue. The sound stopped too, but it did not stop right away. There was a delay of maybe 1 or 2 seconds, but then they stopped. I froze up and tried to listen for anything out of the ordinary, but there was nothing beyond the howling wind and the falling snow. I started walking again, and this time the footsteps did not resume right away, so I thought everything was good. But then a few minutes later I heard those damn footsteps again, matching my slow, hobbling pace. I kept turning around, but I could not see anything behind me. It was especially freaky because I knew I would not be able to run if there was an actual threat out there. That was the worst part of the whole situation. I would have loved to investigate or try to scare off whatever animal was stalking me, but I did not have the physical mobility to do so, so I just kept moving forward. But then I heard something metallic off to my left. I do not really know how to describe it. It was this low, distinct sound, like something lightly hitting a metal fence post or a piece of equipment. It was freaky because there was not supposed to be anything but trees out there. So, I had no idea what could be making a metallic sound of all things. The sounds must have distracted me, because it suddenly dawned on me that I had not been keeping track of those footprints I noticed earlier on the trail. I looked down at the snow and realized they were gone. I turned around frantically, but I could not see when they had branched off, or if they had turned around or something. I kept looking to my left, trying to see through the thick trees so I could at least spot whatever had made that metallic sound. My eyes locked onto something in the snow, and the alarm bells started going off in my brain. There was another set of footprints coming out of the tree line on my left, running parallel to mine through the snow. They were not that far away, which was the most concerning part. Whoever had been ahead of me on that trail was now walking alongside me through the trees, just out of sight, keeping pace with me. At that point, I was so scared that I was not thinking straight. I should have kept my mouth shut. I should have just kept going. But instead, I spoke up, asking if anyone was there. My voice sounded small and weak in the cold air. I did not get an answer, and after about 20 seconds of waiting in the silence, I knew I had to get out of there. But my stupid ankle was still killing me, so I could not move very fast. I wanted to run or at least jog, but I physically could not do it. I was pretty close to my camp though, so I just told myself if I kept moving, I would be fine. I was not hearing footsteps behind me anymore, which was a good sign. But I knew there was someone out there, someone who had been ahead of me at one point, which did not make sense. I was really close to my campsite when I heard the sharp sound of a heavy branch snapping from somewhere behind me. It obviously was not a natural sound, or I would not bother mentioning it. Someone had stepped on it. I did not stop moving. I kept thinking about how if I just made it back to my tent, I would be good, and eventually I did reach my campsite. It was fully dark at that point, and only after getting inside my tent did I realize I was not any safer in there than I had been hobbling through the woods. A thin layer of nylon was not going to protect me. I started packing up my gear immediately, stuffing my sleeping bag and tools into my pack. My stupid foot made it so hard to move quickly, but I tried my best to rush. I would say maybe 60% of how scared I was due to the fact that in a fight or a chase, I would be completely screwed without the ability to move properly. Before I finished packing, I heard the thing that I had been dreading the whole time. Footsteps right outside the tent. I was so unbelievably scared at that point, and I started thinking about all my options. The footsteps were not approaching my tent directly, but rather circling it slowly. There was nothing I could do but wait for them to charge my tent. The sounds of them circling went on for what felt like 5 minutes before everything went quiet. I had not heard whoever was out there walk away, but I did not care. I was leaving, person or not. I finished packing my backpack and took a really deep breath before unzipping my tent and stepping out into the cold snow. The moment I got outside, I looked into the trees and wanted to scream. There was a guy standing in the tree line, staring right at me. He was really old and sickly, almost like he was dying. He looked absolutely disgusting and unkempt, with thin hair and a pale, hollow face. I stared back at him, frozen in place. I was fully expecting him to charge at me, but he did not move. I put my hands up in the air and told him that I did not want any trouble. He did not respond to me. I did not know what to do next. The staring contest lasted for a few minutes before he finally said something that I still think about to this day. He looked at me and said, "You are a lucky man." Then he simply turned around and disappeared into the dark woods. The rest of that night is pretty blurry to me, partly because I was still in so much physical pain, and partly because of the terrifying encounter. If that guy wanted to fight me or kill me, he probably could have done it easily with my ankle all messed up. There would have been absolutely nothing I could have done to stop him. I finished packing the rest of my gear and left the area, not even caring about the fact that it was pitch black outside. When I eventually made it back to civilization and got checked out by a doctor, They took some x-rays and told me I had severely sprained my ankle, and it was an absolute miracle I had not messed it up worse by walking on it for miles. I had to wear a heavy medical boot for several weeks, and the recovery process was slow. I ended up reporting that freak in the woods to the local authorities, but I know nothing was ever going to come of it because there was no crime committed and they had no way to track him. I did not take another winter contract for almost a full year after that. I still do remote land surveying work because it is my livelihood and I am good at it, but I do not camp alone on winter assignments anymore. I either bring someone along with me or I simply turn the job down. This is still the absolute scariest thing that has ever happened to me in my entire life. I have lived in Alaska for most of my life. My family moved to Fairbanks when I was only 6 years old, and I never really left. I spent my summers working at various fish camps as a teenager, which taught me a lot about hard work in the outdoors. I started guiding professionally in my early 20s, and that has basically been my entire life ever since. I am 29 years old now. I work seasonally as a wilderness guide in northern Alaska, and I have been doing it long enough that I do not really get rattled much out there. I do not get lost easily. Or, I guess I should say, I did not think I could ever get lost, because what happened 3 years ago kind of forced me to completely reconsider that assumption. My boyfriend at the time was named Randy. He grew up in rural British Columbia and was basically the male version of me when it came to the outdoors. Actually, that is not really fair to him, because he was probably much more experienced than me in certain areas, like winter navigation specifically. We had been together for about 4 years, and most of our relationship revolved around outdoor trips that would make normal couples absolutely miserable. We are talking about week-long hunts and backcountry camping, where you actually have to plan meticulously or you will die. That sounds dramatic, but it is literally the truth up here in Alaska. The plan for this specific trip was to snowmobile between two state-registered cabins that were about 60 miles apart. These cabins are maintained for safety, giving travelers a place to escape the extreme cold. We would spend a night at each cabin and be back home in 4 days. We had done this exact trip twice before in previous years, and it was always fine. The weather forecast looked perfectly good when we left, so we were not worried at all about the conditions. The first day was completely uneventful. We made great time and got to the second cabin by late afternoon. We ate these freeze-dried meals that Randy swore tasted good, but they were honestly terrible and chalky. We used an old deck of playing cards that had been left in the cabin drawer by a previous traveler, the corners of the cards worn down and stained with grease. After dinner, we played cards by the light of our lanterns and talked. It was a pretty relaxing evening, and we felt great about the trip. The next morning, I woke up and realized there was a genuine storm going on outside. It was basically a full-on blizzard that had come out of nowhere, which was super surprising, given the fact that there had been absolutely nothing indicating precipitation in the weather forecast the day before. Randy and I decided to brave the storm despite the fact that we had plenty of food and could have totally waited another day inside the cabin. We should have waited another day. I know that now, and I will regret that decision for the rest of my life. Things went south really quickly once we got out on the trail. The wind was almost worse than the snow itself. It was blowing so hard that it was really difficult to see much of anything in front of us. Because of the low visibility, Randy opted to take the lead. I was just following the path of his snowmobile, which was admittedly a lot easier than trying to navigate the terrain in low visibility without anything in front of me. This is why I do not blame him at all for what happened next. I do not really know how it happened, but 1 second Randy was just plodding along on his machine, and the next second his snowmobile was completely flipped over on top of him. I jumped off my machine and ran over to him as fast as I could through the deep snow. But it was too late to prevent a serious injury. His leg was bent in a way legs should absolutely never bend. Keep in mind, this was a guy who had once finished a 2-day wilderness trek on a severely sprained ankle and did not even mention it to me until we were back at the truck. So for him to be grimacing in pain meant it was incredibly bad. The first thing I tried was getting him onto my snowmobile. That was the obvious move. Just get him on the back of my machine and ride us both to the nearest cabin. But Randy is 6 feet 2 inches tall and weighed probably 220 pounds at the time. Those snowmobiles are not like ATVs where you can just easily throw someone on the back and go. Operating an Arctic Cat in deep snow is already a lot of machine to handle by yourself. I managed to get him up once, half dragging him onto the seat behind me. He lasted maybe 10 seconds before he lost his grip and slid off the side of the machine. The sound he made when he hit the hard ground is something I never want to hear again as long as I live. I tried one more time, and it was even worse. He could not grip with his legs at all because of the fracture, and every time the machine shifted even slightly in the snow, he would start to slide off. There was simply nothing I could do to hold him up and steer the heavy machine at the same time. After the second attempt, he looked at me and told me to stop, and the way he said it, he was not asking me, he was telling me. That is when we both kind of accepted what the actual plan was going to have to be. I pulled out our satellite phone, and my hands were shaking so bad from the cold and the panic that I almost dropped it in the snow. I actually managed to get a weak connection after a few tries, but I was not sure if my message about our coordinates and where we were actually got through to the dispatchers. Relying on someone else to come save Randy in a blizzard was a terrible idea, and we both knew it. I knew what had to happen. I would leave him sheltered with everything we had, then take my snowmobile and push as hard as I could for the nearest cabin to use the emergency radio. There was not really a detailed discussion about it. Randy just looked at me, and I looked at him, and that was it. We knew the stakes. I got him set up with every extra layer of clothing we had, wrapped him in a heavy thermal bivy sack, and marked our exact coordinates on my GPS unit. The battery on the Garmin was draining fast because of the intense cold, so I had to be quick. He told me to be careful, and then he told me not to do anything stupid, and then I just left him there, lying in the snow in the middle of a blizzard. I was navigating mostly by feel and the GPS screen, but the circumstances seemed so dire that I was having trouble not completely freaking out. After about 45 minutes of riding, things started feeling off. It felt like the landmarks were not matching up with my memory, and the terrain did not look right at all. I kept telling myself it was just the heavy snow messing with my perception, but the bad feeling in my gut just got worse and worse. And then, through the thick trees to my left, I saw smoke. I angled my snowmobile toward it, thinking I had somehow looped back to one of the state cabins, but as I got closer, I realized the structure did not match either of the cabins we knew. It was much smaller and kind of ugly, honestly. It had rough wooden siding, with one side of the building almost completely buried in a massive snowdrift. There was a faint glow coming from the window, and dark smoke was coming out of the chimney. At that point, I did not care who lived there. I just realized that smoke meant a person, and a person meant a potential radio, or at least a way to warm up enough to keep going. I killed the engine of my snowmobile and trudged through the deep snow over to the wooden door. I knocked loudly a few times, expecting someone to come over and open the door, but no one did so. I tried the door handle and realized it was completely unlocked. I walked in and was kind of surprised to discover that it was really warm in there. It was definitely inhabited. There was a wood stove in the corner with a hot fire going inside, and a bedroll was laid out on the floor. There was also a can of some kind of food sitting on the floor with a metal spoon still resting in it. It honestly looked like whoever was living in there had walked out the door 5 minutes before I came in. I announced my presence loudly, asking if anyone was home, but no one answered me. So I just stood there near the stove, warming my freezing hands and trying the satellite phone again. But I had no luck getting a signal inside, which was pretty disheartening. Still, though, I did not want to go back out into those treacherous conditions yet, but I knew I had to. Randy's life was depending on me finding help. As I was turning to leave the cabin, I noticed something strange sitting on a wooden shelf on the back wall. I walked over to it and realized it was a pair of binoculars, along with a folded map and a small notebook. I unfolded the map and realized it was a detailed trail map of the exact area we had been riding through. Several sections of it were circled in red marker, and I recognized some of the locations. 2 of them specifically caught my eye. Both of the state cabins we had been staying at were circled, and there were dates written next to them in pencil. Some were from that current winter, some were from the winter before that, and so on. I picked up the notebook and opened it. I realized whoever it belonged to had been documenting people in the area. There were handwritten descriptions of people, like what gear they were carrying, what they were wearing, what direction they were headed, and that sort of thing. I was instantly really unsettled by this discovery. There was a very good chance that Randy and I were written down somewhere in that notebook, but I was not about to stick around to check. I do not really know how to tell you what it felt like in that moment. It was not fear right away. It was more like every single thing in that cabin just sort of rearranged itself in my head. It did not feel like a safe refuge anymore. It felt incredibly dangerous. I put everything back down on the shelf and went straight for the door. But before I could reach the door handle, I heard the loudest and scariest scream I have ever heard in my entire life. It came from directly below me, under the wooden floorboards of the cabin. It was the voice of a woman, and she was not saying any words. She was just screaming at the top of her lungs, sounding like she was being actively stabbed or tortured. The sheer shock of the sound made me literally jump in the air, and my survival instinct kicked in. I ran out the door, slammed it behind me, and scrambled to my snowmobile. I started the engine as fast as I possibly could, and rode out of there into the blizzard without even looking back once. I never got another glimpse of that cabin. I was a total mess after that, to the point where I do not really remember the details of the rest of my journey. At some point, through sheer luck, I made it to the real estate cabin and got through to help on the emergency radio. They had to dispatch a rescue helicopter just to make it to Randy in those terrible conditions. The sound of the helicopter rotors in the distance was the most beautiful sound I have ever heard. When they found him, the crew used a blinding spotlight to locate him through the storm. He was near death from hypothermia, and his leg was in terrible shape, but he was alive and conscious. They flew him to the nearest hospital where he underwent emergency surgery to place metal rods in his leg. It was the worst few hours of my life, to the point where I have trouble even piecing together the exact sequence of events. Randy survived, but the experience was so traumatic for him that he swore off winter backcountry trips forever, or at least as long as we were still together. I told as many people as I could about that strange cabin and the woman screaming under the floorboards. I was told by the authorities that they would send someone out there to investigate as soon as the weather conditions were safe enough to do so. And you best believe I followed up on that repeatedly because I could not sleep at night. After a few days, they eventually told me they had sent a small search team out to those coordinates, but they were not able to find any structure matching my description and location. The officer I was speaking with actually had the audacity to suggest that I had hallucinated the whole thing due to stress, panic, and extreme cold, and I completely flipped out on him. That was basically the end of our conversation, and they closed the file. Randy and I broke up about a year after the incident, and it had nothing to do with any of this, but I still think about this cabin all the time. There are really only 3 ways to explain what happened to me that day, and none of them are good. The first explanation is that none of it was real, that I really did hallucinate everything from the cabin right down to the scream. I was terrified, exhausted, and half frozen, and I had just left my boyfriend to potentially die in the snow. My brain might have constructed a highly detailed 10-minute experience inside a building that did not exist. I cannot fully rule that out, even though it feels incredibly real to me. The second explanation is that it was real, and that person screaming was a real victim who desperately needed help. Someone who I just left there in the dark, probably to die. The state troopers either could not find the place in the deep snow, or they simply did not try hard enough to locate it. And whoever was trapped under those floorboards, I do not even know what could have happened to them. The only other explanation is that the cabin was some kind of deliberate trap. Maybe the smoke and the light from the window were supposed to draw lost travelers in, and whoever wrote those notebook entries had been tracking people through that area for a while, looking to kidnap someone, or God knows what else, and I had walked directly into it. Or worse, maybe that trap had actually worked on someone else. That scream I heard, maybe that was someone who was unlucky enough to walk into that cabin sometime before me. And if I had gotten to that cabin just a little bit earlier, it would have been me trapped under those floorboards. I am still not sure what to make of any of this, but it haunts me to this day. When I was a junior in high school, there was this girl I spent a massive amount of time thinking about. Her name was Sienna Rollins. She had this alluring, mysterious presence about her that is kind of hard to explain to people who did not know her, but I will try my best to paint a picture. She was really pretty, of course, but it was much more than just her physical appearance. She had this deep mystique that I could never fully decipher. It was a mystique that you wouldn't typically associate with a generic pretty girl in high school. She was not popular by any means, and I always got the distinct impression that a lot of guys, and girls too, were more intimidated by her than anything else. She was not a warm person, she rarely ever smiled, and most people in our class regarded her as weird or unapproachable. I did not see her that way at all. I actually found her uniqueness and her quiet nature to be incredibly fascinating. Catching eyes with her in the hallway would completely freeze me up, kind of like the way your body adjusts to entering a cold room or experiencing an unexpected cold gust of wind. She reminded me of snow, honestly. The way that a light snowfall can muffle everything around you, including your own thoughts. She had that exact quality, but it was like no one else in the school noticed it but me. People just thought the way she kept to herself and never spoke was weird and creepy, but I was always dying to know what she was thinking about behind those cold eyes. I read a lot of young adult fantasy novels around that time in my life, so that probably had a lot to do with my overactive imagination. I would spend hours in the local library, reading books about dark forests and mysterious creatures, which only fueled my tendency to romanticize the quiet girl in my class. I wrote a lot of fictional stories around that time too. I actually named one of the main characters in a fantasy story I was writing, Sienna, because I liked the name so much, and because she was always on my mind. You could easily say I was obsessed with her, but I also just genuinely liked her name. Anyway, I was walking up the main stairs with my close friend George one afternoon after class, talking about that exact story I was writing, when he asked me what the main characters' names were. So I told him, and of course, as luck would have it, as soon as I mentioned the name Sienna, who turns the corner at the top of the stairs, by actual Sienna Rollins herself. She was walking with one of her friends, and she clearly heard me say her name. She stopped for a brief second, flashed me a subtle smirk, which was the closest thing to a genuine smile you could ever hope to get out of her, and she said, "Yeah, because you love me," or something very along those lines. I was so incredibly embarrassed, and my face turned completely red. George immediately started laughing hysterically next to me, which made the whole situation 10 times worse. She was already moving past me down the stairs, clearly not interested in continuing the conversation, and my window of opportunity was closing fast. I do not know what came over me in that moment, but right there on the spot, I turned around and asked her out. That actually got her to stop walking, and she slowly turned around and gave me one of her famous icy stares. She did not even have to speak to make me feel small. Her eyes communicated everything. It was like she was saying, "How dare you even ask me that?" But then, she completely surprised me. She actually agreed to go out with me, and she reached out and wrote her phone number on my hand with a black pen. Then she said she would text me the details later, and she walked away without even letting me respond. I was absolutely shocked, but that is how I ended up going on a remote hike with the girl I had been obsessing over for months. The hike was not my idea, by the way. None of it was. She organized the entire day, and I got the distinct impression that I had absolutely no choice but to go along with whatever she wanted to do, and I was completely fine with that. So, fast forward to the weekend, and Sienna is driving us out to this specific trail she had handpicked. I had never been to this trail before, and neither had anyone else I knew in town. The drive was about 45 minutes long, but it felt like only 10 minutes to me because I was so deep in my own head, worrying about what to say. Sienna had her driver's side window down and was playing some strange music from her phone, stuff I did not recognize at all, which tracked with her personality. She drove an old, beat-up sedan that smelled faintly of pine needles and damp fabric. We finally pulled into this small gravel parking lot at the base of the trail. There were maybe 2 other older cars parked there, but we did not see any people around. Sienna did not even think twice about it. She just opened her door, started walking toward the trailhead, and I quickly followed behind her. For the first 20 minutes or so of the hike, things were actually going great. Sienna was more talkative than I had ever seen her in school, which admittedly still was not that talkative, but for her, It was a massive amount of communication. She asked me about the fantasy story I was writing, which was kind of embarrassing. But I gave her a rough summary of the plot while trying my absolute best not to sound like a complete idiot. After some time, the trail began to narrow significantly, and the surrounding trees got much denser. We had not seen another single person since we left the parking lot. At some point, the trail split into a clear fork. I asked Sienna which way we should go, and she pointed to the left path without hesitating for even a second. I asked her if she had been to this specific trail before, and she simply said no. I found that answer to be a little bit strange, especially considering how definitive and confident she seemed to be about every decision she made, but I did not say anything to question her. The left fork of the trail was noticeably less maintained than the main path. I started to get a bad feeling in my gut that we were going the wrong way, but I was not going to question her and ruin the date. I must have been really in my head about that worry, because at one point, I suddenly realized I could not hear Sienna's footsteps behind me anymore. The trail had gotten so narrow that we were walking in a single file line, and she had gestured for me to go first and take the lead. But when I turned around to check on her and see how she was doing, she was not there. The trail behind me was completely empty. I yelled her name as loud as I could, but I did not get any response. I was very confused, so I started walking back the way we had just come. I made it all the way back to the main fork in the trail, and she was not there either. I figured she had probably stopped to use the bathroom in the woods, and did not want me to notice, which was a reasonable enough explanation. But I looked around some more, and realized there was no obvious side trail or clearing for her to wander off into. She was just gone. So I decided to try walking down the right fork of the trail to see if she had gone that way instead. To my surprise, that side of the trail was even more overgrown, and the further I walked, the less it felt like a real, maintained trail at all. I kept calling her name like an idiot, but I did not know what else to do in that situation. I could not imagine why she would have abandoned me out there, so I genuinely thought it was just an honest mistake or a misunderstanding. At one point, I heard a sharp branch snap somewhere off to my left, deeper in the thick trees, and then, when I looked over into the brush, I saw movement. Something shifted quickly behind one of the thicker trees. I instantly thought I knew what was going on. I figured it was Sienna messing with me, playing a prank. That would have been very on brand for her weird personality. So, I figured I would turn the tables on her and surprise her before she could surprise me. I slowly and quietly walked over toward the tree, stepping as softly as I could on the leaves, and at the last second I jumped to the side of the trunk to scare her. But as I was mid-yell, the sound died in my throat as I realized it was not Sienna at all. It was a man. I was absolutely horrified, but it was too late to hide. I was standing inches away from this tall, middle-aged looking man who did not seem scared of me in the slightest. He wore dirty clothes and had a cold, hollow look in his eyes. I instinctively took a few quick steps backward, and the guy just stared at me with this blank, unsettling expression. Before he could say anything to me, I blurted out that I was just looking for my friend, or something stupid like that, which in hindsight was a completely useless and weak thing to say. He clearly did not care about my explanation. He slowly started walking directly towards me. So I turned around and started walking quickly back toward the trail, trying my best not to show panic or run. But then I heard a second rustling sound, this time coming from my right side. I looked over and saw another person moving through the woods. This second guy was not even trying to hide himself in the trees. He was just standing out in the open watching me, and he was holding what looked like a heavy tree branch in his right hand. That is the exact moment when my panic fully set in and I just ran. The second guy was blocking the path back to the main trail, so I was forced to run deeper into the woods with no real sense of direction, just hoping there was another way back to the gravel parking lot. As soon as I started running, both of the men started running after me. They were not even trying to be quiet about it anymore. I could hear them crashing through the brush behind me. I ran as fast as I could, but it was incredibly difficult because the woods were so dense and overgrown. Before I could react, something caught my ankle from behind, and I fell hard to the ground, face first. It was the first man, and he immediately tried to pin me down and hold my arms behind my back. I screamed at the top of my lungs and kicked as hard as I could, and by some absolute miracle, I was able to kick him in the chest and get him off me. I scrambled back to my feet and kept running, not looking back. My mouth was full of blood at that point because I had bitten my lip hard when I hit the ground, and my jacket was torn. I do not think they followed me very far after that, but I did not care. I just ran until I finally found the main trail, and then I kept running until I made it all the way back to the parking lot. Sienna's car was still parked in the lot, but the other two cars I had seen earlier were completely gone. Sienna was not anywhere in sight, which freaked me out even more. I started thinking that those men who had tried to catch me had gotten to her first, and that she was in danger. I did not know what to do. I must have called her phone like 10 times in a row, and she did not pick up once. I was just about to call the police when I received a text from her asking where I had gone. I was typing a frantic response when I looked up and saw her walking slowly out of the tree line, looking completely calm and unaffected. I yelled at her to hurry up and get in the car, trying to explain that we were in danger, but she did not seem fazed by my panic at all. I told her I was not kidding, that I had been attacked, but she just seemed more irritated by my behavior than anything else. Either way, we got into her car and started leaving. I told her everything that had just happened to me in the woods, and she still did not seem particularly moved or concerned, which was absolutely insane to me. That is when I finally demanded to know where she had gone when she disappeared. She told me she thought I had gone ahead without her, and that she had been trying to catch up to me the entire time. I knew that was a blatant lie, because I had walked all the way back to the fork, so there is no way we would have missed each other on that narrow path. That is when the chilling realization dawned on me that she might have had something to do with what happened. What that something could have been, I had no idea, but the pieces fit together too perfectly. The ride back to town was the tensest 45 minutes of my entire life. I kept looking over at her silent profile and wondering whether someone who seemed so innocent and nonchalant could actually do something so heartless and cruel to another person. Honestly, the answer was probably yes. We finally arrived at my house, and we said a brief goodbye, and then I was alone again in my room, trying to make sense of the nightmare. I was still in complete shock from the whole encounter. I could not get over the fact that within minutes of Sienna disappearing from my side, two dangerous strangers appeared in the exact stretch of woods she had led me into. It was the trail she had picked, the fork she had chosen, and she had specifically put me in the lead position. It felt completely orchestrated from start to finish, and then she just showed up after the whole thing without a single scratch on her, calmly asking me where I had gone. We did not hang out a single time after that day. I never asked her to, and if I was not reaching out to her, there was absolutely zero chance she was ever going to reach out to me. When we were at school, she completely ignored me as if we had never met, and I made sure to avoid her at all costs. George asked me about the date, and when I told him what happened, he stopped laughing. Rumors started to spread around our school about that weekend, but Sienna acted completely normal, as if nothing had ever happened. I have told maybe 4 or 5 close friends this story over the years, and their response is always exactly the same. They all believe that Sienna set me up, that she knew that remote trail, and she knew those men who were waiting in the woods. I have considered that theory more times than I can count, but I just have no idea why anyone would do something like that to me. I have no idea where Sienna is now. She is not on any social media platforms, and I have no idea where she went to college or if she even stayed in the state. Sometimes I wonder if she is still out there, finding other guys to take on quiet hikes in the woods. Thank you so much for watching. Let me know what you thought of today's episode in the comments. And remember, we have a whole playlist of true crime episodes ready for you to binge right now. Until next time, see ya.